Good evening, everyone. This is Rob Orson with the Emerging Revolutionary War. I am joined by good friends Mark Malloy and Philip Greenwald. We're brought to you tonight by just having a good time and talking history and talking about our next year's bus tour. Some of you all joined us this past 2 weeks ago now. We were at Value Forge in Monmouth on the sold-out bus tour. We had a great time. So our plans tonight is to talk a little bit about the bus tour we just covered, talk about next year's bus tour, which we're very excited about, talk about where we're going, and then kind of flesh out a little bit why we chose where we're going and what we thought was important about going where we're going. With that being said, I'm going to kick it to Phil because Phil was one of our guides this past bus tour at Value Forge. Phil, I know the first day Billy did most of the talking, but talk about some of the things that you thought were important for us that we did on that tour and some of the more unique experiences that we had.
Sure. I feel like to kick it off, to move to where we're going to be going, to give you a little foreshadowing of next year's tour, is that you've got to finish with the last major battle in the Northern Theater. And that's kind of crazy when you think that the last major battle is 1778 in June of that year at Monmouth. It's considered one of the hottest days of the year. We actually had some good weather on that day, some warm weather to make the trip. On the way, though, we are Emerging Revolutionary War, and we like to merge people into some of these obscure sites. So we did get to hit Barron Hill on the way out, which is the Marquis de Lafayette's first independent, actually, field command. He is given command farther north during the winter, but nothing comes up to one of the potential invasions of Canada. So his first time out is at a little to the east of the Valley Forge encampment, fought on May 20th, 1778. And it's unique because of some of the men that are there with them, including Oneida, Tuscarora Native Americans. You're also looking at some of Daniel Morgan's riflemen, some of Washington's lifeguards. George Washington packs this unit with like the who's who of the Army. So about 2,200 men altogether. And they're almost bagged by Howe's forces. This is the last time Sir William Howe will play his role in active field command in the North American theater before he jumps ship and heads back to England to defend what he didn't do the previous winter or fall in the support of John Burgoyne. The trip to Monmouth, of course, is a great state park laid out. They have a nice visitor center that we were able to get the visitors into. Billy showed some of the iconic sites from the hedgerow to discussing that fiery temper that George Washington always held under check. And debating some of the facts behind that big myth. The one thing most people know about Monmouth, obviously, is what happens, the verbal altercation between George Washington and his second command, Charles Lee. After that, we actually took a repose for the middle of the day, ate there at Monmouth, much like the soldiers probably would have loved to do in June of 1778. Got some great refreshments, and then tackled the second part of the day, which also included going back to a place this time with no spiders. So thank you, Mark Malloy. So no spiders running through the graveyard. But we got to go into the chapel there with the Old Testament, or as I said,
Tenant meeting house. Yeah.
Tenant meeting house. Sorry, I have a testament today from church services. So it is Sunday. Yeah, tenement there, and a good guide showed us some of the was able to open the house. I mean, I've been there multiple times to the battlefield. And that's the first time I've been inside there to see the pews, to see kind of where they laid one of the bodies out. I know I don't want to speak for the two Virginians that are here, but they want to talk about one of the Virginians that was brought in there. I'll pass that on to them. But so it was great. I mean, 50 some people. We were able to, in late November, having I think 50 some people in 50-degree weather hiking around Monmouth. You couldn't have asked for a better first day, following a great lecture, Billy and myself setting it up, if I can speak, that is great, on that Friday evening, kicking it off on Veterans Day. So what more patriotic can you get to celebrate some of these veterans of the first war and the American independence movement, and then carrying that through to what we're doing around the world today.
Uh, for the spiders is an inside joke here. I'm sorry, Mark, I gotta call you out. So if anyone's interested, go back and look at some of our Facebook lives from June of this past year. We were at Tenant Meeting House, and a spider jumped on Mark. And if you listen in the background of Billy's talk at the cemetery, you will hear what sounds like a young schoolgirl yelling and screaming. That's actually Mark. So that's our inside joke there. Mark does not like spiders very much.
Yeah, I was just going to leave it at spiders, but there's Rob.
No,
Yeah,
no.
no.
I had to, we try to have fun. That's why I'm trying to, we have a great time doing this. I think you're right about the Tenant Meeting House, though. That was really great getting inside there. Some of us went up on Thursday, and we happened to go by there. Mark knows no strangers, knocked on the door of the office and got us in there on Saturday. I think that was a good, thing for the tour group to get inside and see that old building. It's such a beautiful place inside. But Mark, talk a little bit about some of the things that we saw inside that Phil alluded to with the pews and some of the things that they were talking about, that being a hospital during the Battle of Monmouth.
Yeah, no, the old Tenant Church it was great like Phil and Robbie, that's the first time I got to actually get on the inside there. So that's kind of an exclusive for us. And the folks there were very accommodating. So we thank them very much for getting our group in there on that Saturday afternoon. And as Phil alluded to, the weather was just gorgeous. And one of the things I love about our group, what we do, it's one thing to read about the history in a book. It's another thing to actually stand there where the history actually happened. Being inside the church, which was used as a hospital, during and after the Battle of Monmouth, they were able to show us some things such as cut marks in the pews that tradition says were from actual bone saws while they were performing amputations there. And what they believe were blood stains on some of those pews as well. And they actually took a sample and sent it off to a lab, and they weren't able to definitively conclude it was or it wasn't blood. But regardless of those really neat connections to the past, the very fact that you're standing in a historic building that's over 250 years old, that was a witness to one of the most brutal days of fighting in the American Revolution. I don't have to tell you guys, but anybody who's read anything about medicine during the American Revolution, it was, I would think it was almost more grisly in one of those than on the actual battlefield. When you have people there's no way to, any way to kind of knock them out or anything, and they had to perform amputations. It must have been just one of the worst, and this was also when there's no germ theory or anything else like that. This must have been one of the worst places to have been. And to know that men were sacrificing there, and then to step outside and to be in the literal graveyard, standing at the graves of men who died that day. There were hundreds of guys who died at Monmouth, whether in the battle or from the heat. And there is a large mass grave there in the Tenant graveyard. So it was, I would say, to me, that was one of the highlights of the whole tour, because after, Billy did a fantastic job of walking us across the whole battlefield. And like I said, it's one thing to read it in a book, but when Billy, who literally wrote a book about the Battle of Monmouth, A Handsome Flogging, if you haven't checked it out, definitely check that out. But when he's telling you the story of Lee confronting Washington and what actually happened that afternoon, and it's not some distant place, you're standing on the actual spot where it happened. He can point to the actual rise where the two men actually met. It makes the history come to life. Another amazing moment was when, and I love, it's one thing the history, it's another thing the place, and the third thing is the people. And I just gotta thank everybody who bought a ticket and came on the tour. I think we have some of the best fans, people who are willing to come on these tours with us. Are excited to listen and hear these stories. But one of them shared that he actually had an ancestor that was actually at the artillery, near the artillery battery where the famous Molly Pitcher was firing her cannon, and for him to be able to be pointed out where that artillery piece was. And we actually got a picture of him there. That that was another really neat thing to be able to have that personal connection. We had another gentleman when we went to Valley Forge who had an ancestor in the 3rd Virginia Regiment, which is, yeah, me and Rob are big fans of that unit because it saw so much action. And to be able, he was excited to be able to actually find where the 3rd Virginia was camped during the winter of Valley Forge. So I would say those were definite highlights for me. Getting some of that exclusive access to places I'd never been before, being able to hear the history standing on the actual ground, and then actually talking to people who have descendants who wanted to see where their ancestors were. I thought that was fantastic.
And that one gentleman actually has letters that he's going to share with us. We're actually going to do some blogging with him to try to share some of that family history, which gives some really neat insights to not just Monmouth, but he's almost the entire war. So there's some really interesting first-person accounts that haven't really been shared yet. So looking forward to seeing that.
He was telling me where he was. I said, "Oh wow, he's like the Forrest Gump of the Revolution," because he's Washington's Army all up and down. It's some of those guys, and as Phil alluded to, we do it on Veterans Day weekend, this tour. And I think it's super appropriate to be able, when you talk about guys who stuck it out through the entire length of that war is pretty amazing when you look at all the ups and downs you're going throughout that war. It's almost a miracle, as they say, the victory that the Americans had.
And then the second day, as everyone's been alluding to, it was really warm at Monmouth, not as hot as it was in June of 78 when the battle was fought, but warm. And then Sunday, the weather turned super cold, which was somewhat appropriate for Valley Forge. So Valley Forge is not the coldest winter. I know it's Morristown, but it was interesting to be at Valley Forge when the weather changed, got a little bit cold. But Phil, if you want to talk a little bit about the Valley Forge trip, it was our half-day tour on Sunday. Our hotel was right next to the park, so it made a nice convenient spot to spend the morning there. So if you have any insight there, Phil.
Sure. I think the weather was synonymous to what it would have looked like in 77, 78. It was windy. It was cold, but not frigid. There's not the amount of snow that happens up in Morristown. But Valley Forge, so we did tackle it in a few hours. If you haven't been there recently, Valley Forge has a great new exhibit area that kind of it encompasses more than just what one aspect of that encampment, from what men had to go through to the medical side of it, to what's happening in the war as well. It is one thing that Billy and I both try to avoid in our conversations was that it was a turning point, because that term gets bandied around so much about this is a turning point, that's a turning point. But Valley Forge is really a series of decisions that are made. We always like to talk about like these 10 key decisions that are made in the American Revolution or in other wars or so forth. And there at Valley Forge, you have multiple ones, from how Washington starts to grow as a political leader, to the memory of what that place means, to the impacts of the global reach of the American Revolution. That's the winter where the French have now come in, and now you have this Prussian guy, Baron von Steuben, who comes and trains, and he kind of melds the old and new world. And of course, you have the French officers besides Lafayette. You have the Irishman, who's always causing trouble. Irish people always causing trouble, right, Mark? Anywhere you go, Thomas Conway as well. But you also have probably one of the most well-preserved national park units. They really have a great volunteer base that helps with like the hut brigade that are there, and they so you can walk in and see how cold and drafty these places were. You also have the great markers of where the different encampments were, the different lines, the different units by state. Even places like Maine put a monument in, even though they did not have, were still part of Massachusetts at the time of the American Revolution. You also have a great tributes to American memory from the arch there that's built in the 20th century to the the cathedral there as well, to some of the newer monuments coming in, commemorating some of the ones that fought that kind of get overshadowed, the African Americans, or even Nathaniel Greene. And we may be talking more about Nathaniel Greene as we go on here, but his roles from going from a line to a quartermaster and what that taught there. To Nathaniel Greene, he once remarked that you never heard of a quartermaster in history. So now he's getting his mention in history, at least here on this Zoom or this live here at 7:16 Eastern Standard Time.
He has a monument at Valley Forge. He's got
and there's a monument, but of course they put it right by the road with no turnoff and so forth. So yeah, once again, and then of course the new newer monument turnoff area that they've improved with at the Baron Stuyben, which is a nice little parking lot area. They really try to update that, so you can look out into that training ground and take a hike out into that field that really made a major difference. John Adams remarked in the previous fall when the Continental Army marches to Philadelphia that they don't look like an army yet. They don't have that martial spirit as they march through on the way to the banks of the Brandywine Creek. Well, von Steuben gives them that kind of spirit de corps and that ability to just do the simple maneuvers that will be bred into them that at Monmouth and other places in the heat of battle, no pun intended, at Monmouth, that they will adhere to what was taught by that Prussian, German cussing, French speaking Prussian officer that's a baron from some small German principality. So if you could be more multinational than Baron von Steuben, that's a major feat. So also highlights include, of course, getting down to where the Potts House was, where Washington headquarters and so forth. Yeah, and then ending up being able to get in and see the film, and which is just a unique experience. Walking into the Valley Forge, I've always liked how they've redone had the visitor center and the display there. So now that they've really updated the exhibits, it's definitely worth a visit back. And so it was kind of a nice cap. And of course, as historians and history enthusiasts, we always love a good bookstore. So there was a chance to cap the trip off with a purchase there at the bookstore. Since all of us on here have books in this series. I'm beating Mark too. Usually he self promotes first.
That's right.
So
well, Mark's going to self promote here pretty soon. Before we jump to where we're going next year, we definitely want to thank. We have some great partners that we work with, not just the American Battlefield Trust, which we do a lot of programs and events with them, but Tom Hand with the Americana Corner was a sponsor for us this time, and is just a great supporter of what we do. And we're trying to support as much as they do. And then go ahead.
Sure.
Oh yeah. I got my Tom Hand shirt. Everyone on the tour gets a free Americana Corner t-shirt, which is actually pretty cool. So if you come next year, we hope to have some shirts for you. And then also our good friend John Adams, who owns a company called Liberty Cigars. We've had John on with us before. He produces cigars with a early American history theme. Mark has one of the boxes that John sent us. It kind of breaks up there, Mark. Your background's hiding in the box.
It's empty. So.
It's empty. Well, it's empty because some of us like to partake in a couple smokes on the battlefield. So John was nice enough to send some our way, and he's been a very big supporter of ours. So just want to say thanks to John with Liberty Cigars and Tom Hand of Americana Corner, because they, we try to help each other out. I think we have a great relationship with both of those. So Mark, let's talk about 2023. I will say that the date is November 10th through 12th. We're keeping it with the Veterans Day weekend. Some people asked us about why. I think Mark and Phil kind of talked about that. This is a good way for us not just to honor our veterans and veterans of early American history, but it's also tends to be a weekend where people have a day off here or there to allow them to go on a tour. The weather is usually pretty good in November. We've been lucky, knock on wood here. Hopefully it's gonna be really good this year because we're going south, Mark. So where are we going?
Yes, drum roll please. We are going, as you see behind me, we're going south. We're going down to South Carolina, Charleston, South Carolina. We're going to the Low Country. That's right. Which, the past 2 years, this will be our third tour. The past 2 years, we have been up in the New Jersey and Pennsylvania area. which is great because it lined up with many of the books that our authors recently have come out with. But we're moving south this year because we have a couple books that are going to be coming out this year. They're going to focus on the Southern campaign of the Revolution. Southern campaign of the American Revolution, I believe, is one of the more overlooked aspects of the American Revolution. And we wanted to make sure we got in some Southern campaign stuff because we're going to be coming up shortly to many of the 250th events. And a lot of our focus is going to drift to the Northeast and New England. So we want to make sure that we're trying to cover all aspects of the American Revolution, whether that's from New England down to the Southern campaign, and we even got some stuff in the works for moving out towards the Midwest. So we got a lot coming up, but we wanted to highlight Charleston. We wanted to highlight the Southern campaign. I have a book coming out this spring called To the Last Extremity, The Battles for Charleston, 1776 to 1782. This book is going to give a overview of Charleston, South Carolina in the American Revolution during those years. Charleston was the site of three actions. One major battle in 1776 that you see depicted behind me, the Battle of Sullivan's Island, also known as the Battle of Fort Moultrie. And then there's also in 1779 a British force nearly captures the city of Charleston in May of 1779. And then in 1780 there's a major siege of Charleston, where the British lay siege to the city and force it's the worst defeat of the American Revolution for the Continentals, with an army of nearly 6,000 men that are captured there. Now, on this tour, we're going to be covering a lot of ground, but we're going to make sure we're going to it's going to be set up similar to our previous two tours. We're going to have a Friday night talk. We're going to have a Saturday all-day touring experience where the bus is going to take us. We're going to be headquartered at North Charleston. The bus is going to take us down to Sullivan's Island. That morning, we're going to do Sullivan's Island. In addition to, there's a national park site there, Fort Moultrie, which interprets the battle, but we'll be there to talk about specifically that 1776 battle. We're also going to see some other sites on the island there, some new sites that interpret some other actions that were happening during that same day. We're going to head downtown that afternoon, and we're going to be focusing on that 1780 siege. We're going to point out some of the sites. Now, much of that's been lost to time, but luckily you got us as tour guides, so we're going to tell you what was where, when it was, and what happened there. And then we're also going to take you downtown to see there are still some buildings and sites you can see down there related not only to the 1780 siege, but then the 2 years of occupation the city suffered under, and talk about that. And then its ultimate liberation. And then the next day, we're going to go back that evening. The next day, we're going to head out to some other sites in the Low Country. One of them being the last major battle of the Southern campaign, and that was the Battle of Eutaw Springs, which is a little further north and east or west of North Charleston. So we're going to finish up. We're just going to do a morning on the Sunday, and then we'll break like we did for the last year. People, like I said, the reception to our past two tours has been fantastic. We already have sold over 20 seats on the bus already. So if you're interested in joining Emerging Revolutionary War on our annual bus tour, you can go visit our website, emergingrevolutionarywar.org. There's a tab there for the 2023 bus tour. That'll take you to our Eventbrite page where you can purchase your ticket and join us down there. It also has information for the hotel we're staying at. And we're really hoping that we get a lot of people who have been on our previous tours, but then also people who maybe have lived south and haven't had the opportunity to travel up to Pennsylvania or New Jersey. We're hoping you come join us this November or this coming November for the To the Last Extremity, the Battles for Charleston tour.
And I'll say that there's a link in the chat with the registration for that. Mark's right, we've already sold 20 tickets. The way we have sold 20 tickets is if you are on tour with us 1 year, we give everyone on that tour an early bird rate to join us the next year. So the people that were on our tour this year are already 22 have already signed up for next year, which is great. Also, Mark didn't talk about the most important thing, which is the fee. So it's really inexpensive. It's $200. We are going up a little bit this year from $175 to $200 next year, and that's just because the bus got increased. The bus prices have gone up. Everyone knows how fuel has gone up, so the bus price went up a little bit. So we had to increase the cost, but still $200 for a lecture all-day tour and a half-day tour in one of the most beautiful cities in America. Charleston is one of the most prettiest cities you can ever visit. Even if you're not into history, it's great food, just great scenery. It's a great rate. You're not going to find a tour at that price anywhere else, I guarantee it. Also, we have a great guide. Mark has worked in Charleston, has lived in Charleston. And of course, as he just mentioned, his book about Charleston is coming out pretty soon. So you have an expert guide leading us around. And I think Phil and I might help on Utah Springs this Sunday. We haven't figured it out. Mark has to convince us to do that. But but so let's talk about the South. Let's talk about South Carolina. And I know I'm going to upset some of our friends from New Jersey that watch us a lot. But South Carolina, New Jersey always has this argument when it comes to Rev War history, where the most battles and actions take place. People in Jersey say it's New Jersey. People in South Carolina say it's South Carolina. I've been researching a lot about South Carolina because of my book about Camden coming out next year as well. I'm kind of lean to South Carolina, but we just had Bert Dunkerley of our group on 2 weeks ago talking about all the small actions going on in New Jersey. So Phil, I'm going to put you in the spot a little bit because Mark's already talked a lot. Let's talk about South Carolina. Why is South Carolina so important to what happens in the American Revolution?
Well, I mean, multiple reasons. Of course, Charleston is one of the larger cities, and after the 1780, I mean, the fall of the only Continental Army, the only nascent movement of the patriotic cause is going to be these partisan rangers, ones that from Thomas Sumter to Francis Marion to other ones who can keep the light of revolution alive. And as well as too is it's kind of not with Georgia below it. Georgia is one of those colonies that is late to the revolutionary movement. It is set up slightly different. It's also set up as a buffer initially between the English and Spanish and Florida and so forth. So South Carolina is kind of that last of the big populous colonies, if you want to call them, at the time. And you also have the demographic change from the low country to the high country. So you have this whole mixture already happening from threats from Native Americans in the high country to people being essentially loyal down to some of those larger plantations. And so you have these mix-ups, and then you, of course, create the revolution gives these people a chance to express some of those disagreements in a more violent way. And so you do have these partisan attacks and these small engagements. And I think it's best summed up as every engagement is small unless you are the casualty at that engagement. And then it's a big one. And then, of course, you have, some of the most bigger turning points in the Southern theater as well. I mean, from Charleston, which sets it, to Camden, which eventually sets Washington to send Green down there, to the rallying cry of Waxhaws, to one of the most most successful Dove envelopment of a enemy force at the Battle of Cowpens, which is right there in upstate in South Carolina. It's once you get into the interior of that state and you start realizing a place like Hanging Rock and other ones, Fishing Creek, you just start to, amazing that it is literally I think John Buchanan, who wrote the book Road to Guilford Courthouse, calls it the first American Civil War. And it is, great book, Road to Guilford Courthouse. And he also wrote one, The Road to Charleston, which people can follow with to to see Mark next year at this time. And it's not a yellow brick road, but it at least lead to some good watering holes and fun times. So, but it is the first American Civil War, and I think the same thing up in New Jersey. Not to bring them back in, but it is that Loyalist American, and with no defined lines of where one side is and the other isn't. And you do have some that even like 96 that fought one time for the Americans, and then later on will fight for the British. So even loyalties continue to switch. So you have everything that makes for a tinderbox that erupts, especially when you remove a lot of, for most of the time, a lot of the what we call the traditional forces. And so now you have a more militia, partisan, neighbor versus neighbor type setting.
Yeah, I think too, and you alluded to this about South Carolina with basically being a civil war going on like it was in Jersey. But I think in South Carolina, it's more noted, and throughout history, it's more known because of Bannister Tarleton, right? So, the legend of Tarleton, whether it's, overblown a little bit, maybe Buford didn't get massacred at Waxhaw's. That's a future rivalry we're doing with Dr. Jim Pikuch. He has a great book about Waxhaw's. But I think having Tarleton be involved in the actions in South Carolina, I think kind of helps build that thought that South Carolina is such a civil war inside of itself. What do you think about that, Mark? I think Tarleton is one of the big reasons why we think about that in South Carolina, and the veracity and the violence that takes place at all these places like Huck's Defeat, Williamson Plantation, Hanging Rock, etc.
Yeah, let me go back just for a second and just tell you this. So you're going to talk about how brutal the fighting was in South Carolina. The first exposure I had to that was as a young boy watching the movie The Patriot.
It had to happen. It had to happen. The movie will not be shown on the tour, Mark. It's not happening. It's not going to be on the bus.
I'm trying to that has the TVs on it so we can watch it while we're driving around down there. But
you know every line from that movie. Why don't you
just quote it? You can just quote it yourself. Bad history, Mark. Bad history. Go ahead.
Hey, we might be pointing out some filming locations too, because they did film.
Oh gosh, here we go.
Now, no, I think the conflict in the South. Now, Rob alluded to the fact. So, let me just tell you a little bit of my background with Charleston. So, I lived in Charleston from 2007 to 2010. People wonder if I'm originally from there or anything. I'm not. I'm from Virginia. When I was in college, we went, or even before that, when I was a kid, we went on vacation down there. Charleston's, as Rob mentioned, it's a beautiful city. They have beaches down there. We went on vacation down for the beaches. I had my parents take me to some of the historic sites down there. And I was blown away with the history of the city. Just the layers of history there. I think it's important to realize that most people don't associate Charleston or South Carolina with the Revolutionary War. I think South Carolina and Charleston are mostly attributed to the American Civil War. It is the site of the first shots of the American Civil War. Charleston and South Carolina were the first places to secede from the Union. They have a huge American Civil War history. The city was laid siege to during the American Civil War, was fired upon, nearly destroyed, but and then it continues to have that that kind of memory of the importance of the American Civil War there. And what's been kind of lost in many respects is all of its Revolutionary War connections. So when I lived down there back in 2007, 2010. For instance, one of the things we try to do, they still commemorate every year, June 28th, which is known as Carolina Day or Palmetto Day, where they would celebrate this victory that happened in 1776 over the British Navy. But other than that, there wasn't much remembrance of the Revolutionary War. There are many buildings, there's battlefields, there's all sorts of sites connected with it. But for instance, for the whole 1780 siege, there's not much interpretation whatsoever of what happened there. Now, while I was down there, I was able to work with the local groups and be able to install a state historic marker there in Marion Square, which is near the location of where the American Army laid down their arms. Of course, it was a major defeat for the Americans. So that's probably one of the main reasons why people weren't eager to remember that aspect of the revolution there. But in the research I was doing for the book that's going to be coming out, I take people to all the off the beaten sites in the area connected to the revolution. Some of them are marked, some of them aren't. But one of the ones that was just recently marked in the past few years was the site of Dill's Bluff, which was the last engagement in South Carolina during the revolution. And you think of November of 1782, so a war that started up in Massachusetts in 1775. You have the real last bloodshed happening in 1782 down in James Island, South Carolina. So there's so much history there, but I was blown away with that when I visited as a kid. And right after I graduated from college, me and my wife, we decided we just wanted to move to Charleston. We wanted to live there. And so we lived there for a few years. And I had the opportunity to work at Middleton Place Plantation, which is down there. I was an intern at Fort Sumter, Fort Moultrie National Historical Park, which interprets this Revolutionary War history, but also the Civil War history. I was able to do ghost tours at night. So I got all that history in there as well. But it's a neat town because having gone to school in Williamsburg, Virginia at William and Mary, which was all about the colonial history. It was interesting to go to Charleston, which had all that colonial history, but it was also still kind of a very busy modern city as well. And as Phil alluded to, there's plenty of good watering holes. I think I've seen one T-shirt that says Charleston's a drinking town with a history problem. So it was great fun. Me and my wife enjoyed living down there. We ended up moving back up this way to Virginia. But anybody who I've talked to, I've talked about how much I love Charleston, all the great sites to see. I'm excited for the book to come out because people always ask me where are the Revolutionary War sites down there. Now they're going to have a book that's going to tell you the history. It's going to tell you the sites. But nothing beats going there with myself or Rob and Phil, and to be able to actually us to talk to you standing at the site where all that history happened. So go ahead and get your tickets for it because it's gonna be fun. And it's like I said, it's just a love I have for that history. And going back to what we originally said, talking about how brutal this history is. I think that's one of the things everybody's gonna rag on the Patriot for historical inaccuracies, and there are plenty of those. But one of the things that movie did was highlight Charleston and South Carolina and the Revolution, which, as we said, is kind of overlooked. And I think the reasons why it's overlooked is because you had this massive Civil War that kind of took a lot of the air out of the room when it came to remembering and commemorating history in the South. And one of the things also about that is just how brutal the fighting was. And I think that the movie The Patriot shows that with how graphic and gory it is, which is pretty close to accurate of how people being decapitated by cannonballs, the hospital scenes, the musket wounds, and all that other kind of stuff. So
back to my question about Bannister Tarleton. So
you mean Cavington, right?
No. I mean, seriously, but I mean, you talked about how South Carolina sometimes is overlooked when people talk about the American Revolution, but though the thought about South Carolina is that violent Civil War, and I mean, do you think that's more documented in South Carolina because of the likes of Tarleton and Ferguson and some of the unique characters in South Carolina in that Southern campaign? Or, I mean, there are unique characters in New Jersey too, and other states. I get that, but for some reason, when you think about South Carolina, you read about all these kind of loyalist, patriot, provincials, people switching sides, families fighting each other. It's very violent. Why do you think that is in South Carolina? I mean, is it just because it's written about more, or is there something about South Carolina?
I mean, I think part of it is the British shift their entire focus, and like Phil mentioned, that it's good that we ended this last tour with Monmouth, which was, pretty much the last major battle in the Northern Theater during the war. And then they're going to shift their focus to the South immediately after that. And part of the reason of shifting that focus is this belief among many in the British High Command that there is a large contingent of loyalists that will swell into their ranks and help them be able to either put down or at least cut off the Southern colonies and be able to conquer them. So I think that part of it is because it was expressly chosen for that. I think the other thing is because and you're right, there is this Civil War atmosphere that's not just in South Carolina. It's also, on the Western Theater. It's up in New York and New Jersey. We saw Huddy's grave there at the Tenet Church, who was a loyalist partisan who was a patriot who the loyalists hanged or whatever. And so, there was a lot of that loyalist patriot tension in the northern colonies as well. It wasn't just in the South. I think part of the reason why it's remembered is because it was part of this major effort by the British to try and harness some of that. And you also have to remember, there's a large percentage of slaves in the southern colonies as well. And there's a large percentage of Native Americans. And I think the British are trying to use these groups as well to try and fill their ranks and, basically suck support off of the patriot cause in the South.
Let me jump in here real quick. I think, let's boil it down to a word I'm surprised Mark didn't use, because he usually writes these in appendices, like memory, American memory to these. Think about, I think it's two words, because the first word is one very long, over mountain boys or the over mountain men. Think about just guys like Andrew Jackson or Daniel Boone, or later on Davy Crockett. These are American stories, and so prior to the war, Scots, Irish, and all them were shunted off to the side. If you look at Andrew Jackson's forefathers, they apparently came down the Great Wagon Road through the Shenandoah Valley and got not kicked out, but kept moving on to different colonies till they could figure out where to settle. Now Andrew Jackson is claimed by 3 different states as being their native son. So you have this memory piece, and then so what became be called an American, or the ruggedness of it prior to the war, was kind of more of a slander if you were considered British, not American. And then suddenly now you have these men who rose up and gave us one of the great victories at Kings Mountain, and then continue to fight. And then Daniel Morgan and all them personify that kind of frontier culture. Secondly is space too, to preserve these sites. I mean, you go to some of these places in South Carolina in the interior, and you could still walk the grounds. Problem with New Jersey is that New York City exploded across and everything, and now you go place like Springfield or the Battle of Springfield or Connecticut Farms or so forth outside of Monmouth or outside of Morristown, and you're walking city streets and so forth. So you lose that kind of perspective. So I think it has a lot to do after the war as well, because of, and it's also the unknown too. So, I mean, you have this emergence of everything that Mark said, plus the American memory, plus of where we try to create our identity of going west, and then also having preserved land to go see, or at least undisturbed land before it's preserved. Plus everything, of course, that happened during the war with the major shift being later on and everything dying out in the North. It happens last, and people tend to remember what happens more later.
Yeah, and I just want to hop on there and say that the preservation thing is huge in my opinion, because that was one of the things I had when I was in Charleston. Was wondering why, the Battle of Sullivan's Island is very significant. But what's interesting is, if you read David McCullough's 1776 book, which is all about the year 1776. The Battle of Sullivan's Island gets, less than one paragraph in the whole book, even though it was a fairly significant action as far as how it shaped the future of the war. And so I think part of it is the history is being written, but then also the preservation. The Battle of Sullivan's Island is being told every day to all sorts of visitors who are visiting a national park there. But one of the things I wonder is, why does nobody remember the 1780 siege of Charleston? Like I said, it's one of the most significant actions of the whole war. It was
because we lost, Mark. Because we lost. We did not. Why do we want to interpret that 5,000 men marched out and weren't even given the honors of war? I mean, they weren't even. I mean, Francis Marion wanted to escape so bad he jumped out of a window.
Right. One of our friends who were with us and on our Valley Forge Monmouth tour, Christopher, just mentioned something that was right on point. There's no George Washington, and so much of the war is, taught, interpreted through the eyes of George Washington, and there's no Washington, right? I mean, I know Mark's a big fanboy of George, and we all are, of course, but there's no Washington in South Carolina, so that
Benjamin Lincoln doesn't have that big following.
Doesn't inspire, does he?
we got General Lincoln, which isn't that being said, Washington's involved. I mean, he's tracking the whole situation, and one of the things I say about the siege is definitely not major defeat, but it was the first domino to drop in a line of dominoes that's going to ultimately wind up at Yorktown. And the bookends between Charleston and Yorktown are just so perfect that a fiction writer couldn't write them better, because you have at Yorktown Benjamin Lincoln, the man who had to surrender disgracefully his entire garrison to the British, is the one who's going to actually receive the sword from the British at Yorktown. And Washington took to heart what was done to the Americans at Charleston, and he had the British follow the exact same surrender pattern that happened at Yorktown. Winning and losing is obviously important, but one of the things that's always struck to me is also the fact that men sacrificed regardless, even though it was a losing effort there, specifically at Charleston. And one of the things that I highlight in the book, and one of the things that we'll talk about on the tour, is what happens to these guys when they surrender. All the Continentals, most of them are going to wind up on prison ships out in Charleston Harbor, and hundreds of them are going to die out there. And sacrificing for their country that way is just, even though they didn't taste victory at that moment, their sacrifices were not in vain. And like I said, when you look at the path that happens after Charleston and the ultimate victory at Yorktown, I think that Siege of Charleston story needs to be told in order to fully understand the significance of the victory at Yorktown. And yes, we don't have Washington, but Washington in 1791, as part of, as president of the United States, he wanted to get the South on board with make sure people were good with the new federal government, and he takes a trip down there. And one of the important things he does is he wants to see all these battle sites, the same thing we're going to be doing. And he writes about it. So we're going to be talking about Washington's visit in 1791 when we're down there as well. And yes, he was only in Charleston for 10 days, but the city remembered it fondly. They still remember it. There's a whole historic house dedicated to him. There's plaques and all sorts of things.
So Mark,
Washington. So.
Mark, would you call that the 10 crucial days of Charleston when he's there?
No, gosh, no. I was gonna say, Phil, too bad George wasn't around to take a trip to South Carolina in December of 1860 if he's trying to get everyone on board the federal government. But anyways,
there you go.
That's a different whole thing.
And I thought, for the 1.5 fans that there is a Washington, isn't William Washington?
Yeah, Bert just.
There it is. I knew there would be one.
Yeah,
there it
Bert.
is.
I thank Bert for that.
If we were betting stuff.
Great book on Utah Springs. So as we're wrapping up here, just kind of want to real quick get Phil and Mark. And Mark, it's gonna be hard for you, so I'll let you go second. I'll Phil go first. Of all the sites in Charleston that we are thinking about going to, we're still working out the itinerary. What do you think, Phil, would be the most interesting to you to see?
Can I go a little outside, since you just mentioned our friend Bert Dunkley? Can I go with Utah?
Yeah, of course.
I gotta stay loyal to my Marylanders who are there as well. But it's one of those. I think it's symbolic of Greene's ability to turn victory or take victory from the jaws of defeat. take victory from the jaws of defeat, or vice versa, whatever you want to say, and everything. But it's kind of one of his last major engagements in the Southern Theater there, and some of the guys who have bled and fought and marched so much, that's their last engagement before they head north. People like Otho Holland Williams and other ones who leave the Army. So it's kind of an amazing small engagement that has some ramifications for setting the scene for the last stages of the war in the South.
Mark?
You're right. It's going to be hard for me because anybody knows me knows I love lots of places.
One,
I think
not two, not three, one. not Benjamin Martin's house, something real.
Oh yeah, all of them are going to be cool. I mean, that's and one of the things that I highlighted for the folks that were on our last tour is, I said if you've never been to Charleston, you got to go because it's just fantastic. The whole place just oozes history. So you got to go. And if you've been and you enjoyed it, you got to go on this tour because you're not going to get the laser-like focus on the Revolutionary War history like you're going to get from us. But if I had to choose one site, I'm going to go with downtown, the Battery in Charleston, because I think when we're down there, you're going to be able to see some of the historic homes right there. In fact, we were just talking about Washington. William Washington's post-war house is still down there, so you're going to be able to see that. If you've never seen the mansions that are down there, most of them are post-war, but it's still gorgeous. But from there, you can look out across the whole harbor, where Charlestonians like to say the Cooper River and the Ashley River converge to form the Atlantic Ocean. And when you're looking out across Charleston Harbor, you read accounts from the time of the battle, 1776. Where the people were anxiously watching the battle that was happening over on Sullivan's Island, the image you see depicted behind me, and that when the flag that you see flying over here, when the flag was knocked down by a cannonball, a great gasp went up among the people on the Battery because they figured that the colors were struck because the Americans had lost this battle. And it was at that moment that one of the greatest heroes of the war, in my opinion, Sergeant William Jasper, called out to Moultrie and said, "Sir, do not let us fight without a flag." He jumped up over the parapet, picked up the flag, tied it to a sponge staff, jumped up on top and replaced the flag in what was just must have been an extremely moving moment to all the people who witnessed it, and revived the drooping spirits of the people there. And that flag today, is a blue flag with the crescent on there. That was incorporated into the modern day South Carolina flag. So when you see that, that's kind of a callback to Sergeant William Jasper. But when you're standing down there at the Battery talking about that, and then the memory there, because what we'll see down there are two statues, one to who I mentioned, Colonel William Moultrie, who goes on to become a general and played an important role in the war, but his greatest moment was there defending the city in 1776. His statue stands there looking out across the harbor at Sullivan's Island. And just behind that is a statue that depicts Sergeant William Jasper, and it's to the defenders of Fort Moultrie during the 1776 battle, and depicts that in bas reliefs around the sides. And it was erected there during the centennial in 1877. So to be able to stand down there and kind of feel all that history, to be able to look out across the harbor, and it's one of the most historic sites because people are standing at that same location watching the bombardment at Fort Sumter in 1861. You kind of get this sense of all the layers of history. So yeah, I'll choose the Battery downtown as my that's going to be one of the coolest sites that we'll see down there.
Sounds good. Mine's the Hornwork, where there's a fantastic historic marker that someone on this call wrote. So no, but that Marion Square there, the Hornwork's pretty cool to think about. The American defensive lines right there. Of course, it's hard to get a feel for that because it's all built up, but it is a little piece of history that's still preserved there in the city of Charleston. So I think it's pretty cool.
I appreciate you saying that. I think that's you're right on mark there. There is a piece of the fortifications that has survived. And yes, I'm glad we have a historic marker there. But yeah, it's a very busy area of downtown. I mean, there's restaurants, bars, and I wonder how many people are enjoying their weekend in Charleston, not realizing the blood that was shed underneath of them. One of the things I think that came out on our tour this past year, or this past month, and something, through our call about Fort Mercer and also the recent discovery of graves at Camden, is that these battlefields aren't just battlefields. They are graveyards. And many of the men who died on these fields are buried there. And I always do wonder about those guys who lie in unmarked graves in downtown Charleston that people probably don't realize, there are some heroes that are buried there. And it's good to remember that. And being able to go down there and know where those lines were, know where those guys fought, I think it'll be a great experience.
So that's our reveal. We're going to Charleston. We're going to South Carolina for 2023. We'll be working with some of our partners down there on the Liberty Trail, which has done a lot of great work down there interpreting all these sites. ABT, which has been working very hard at Utah Springs area. South Carolina Battleground Preservation Trust has been doing some great work. So throughout the year, between now and next year, we hope to bring some of our partners on here on our Sunday night chats, talk about a little bit about the preservation, because that's really what we're doing this for. We do it to talk trash to each other and talk history, but we're really all about trying to preserve these places so the next generation and the generation after can come and visit these places and learn about our great history. So looking forward to that. Speaking of our Sunday night chats, our next one is December 11th. Dr. Mark Linder is coming back on board to talk about his new book on Fort Ticonderoga, The Last Campaigns, 1777 to 1783. Billy will be on with him. A great book, great speaker, great historian. So please check us out December 11th. We are taking December 25th off. I think Mark and I would probably get divorced if we skipped Christmas with our kids to do one of these. So we're going to take December 25th off, but we'll be back in January. This will be coming into our third year of doing these every other Sunday night. We've done almost 3 years worth of these. If you are interested in some of the other ones, they live up on our YouTube page. Mark is doing a great job in turning them all into podcasts. So if you drive around town, sitting in holiday traffic, you can pop us on the podcast and listen to us there. So please check out our YouTube page, check out our podcast page. And finally, check out our website, emergingrevolutionarywar.org. And on there, actually, it's a .com and .org, Mark. I just had a brain. .org, thank you. I had a brain moment there. You'll find all the information about the 2023 tour of next year. And we've already sold a ticket tonight. Just in this conversation, a ticket has sold. So thank you for that. But we hope that if you all are interested, feel free to email us too if you have any questions about where we're going, any questions about the tour. We think it'd be a great experience. We'd like to have a good time and really dive into some of these histories. Again, it's about preservation. It's about standing in the places where this history takes place, because I think it really provides a different level of learning, a different level of appreciation for what occurred. So with that, Phil, Mark, anything else before we sign off? Phil's good. Mark, are you good?
He's always got one more thing.
Well, the Ravens lost and the Bears lost, so Phil and Mark are upset. My Washington team won, so I'm not sure how to react on a Sunday when they win. It's kind of a weird.
Let's go USA on Tuesday.
USA World Cup soccer on Tuesday. That's right. So, all right, gentlemen, thank you all. We'll see everybody in 2 more weeks, and take care and enjoy the rest of your holiday weekend. Bye.